Hey everybody, and welcome back to another RCT scenario playthrough. This is part number 2 of Pacific Pyramids. We have to get 1,000 guests in our park by the end of October year 4. Last time we left off, we had just finished this B&M inverted coaster, kind of sort of based off of the Batman the Ride layout that's found pretty much everywhere. And we've immediately deleted it because I wanted to move it just a little bit so we can adjust the positioning of the whole thing. I kind of like to do this in general just because whenever I build things kind of in an open space like that, if it's not specifically terrain oriented, sometimes it's just easier to build it and deal with where you want to put it afterwards. So that's what we did here, where we built the whole thing and just wanted to move it slightly to get it to the right spot, which is easy enough. So that's what we're going to do here. And we get ourselves a little plaza and we are open for business. So the nice thing is we can charge a whole bunch for this ride, and that's going to help out our cash flow immensely. And really, from this point on, we're not really going to have money issues, so that's a good thing. But now we can kind of loosen this up a little bit and go through here and raise up the landscape a little bit. The intention was to bury a portion of that into a trench, but it didn't really work out. But we're going to build some stuff around this to give it a little bit of interaction. So I figured that little wing over corkscrew right there, we're going to throw a pathway through it. And in the spirit of Anaconda Gold Reef City, which, as I know, is a Giovanola, not a B&M, but it still has some sort of idea here behind it, and the two across trains, so, really you could probably call this a Giovanola. But anyway, we're going to build a rapids ride underneath of it, just like Gold Reef Cities, and I feel like this is a pretty good way to do a little bit of interaction here, and also to give this area a little bit of color. I think, the problem with these desert scenarios is that oftentimes it ends up very kind of tan and brown and just sort of generic drab, I suppose. And it's often a little bit challenging to bring some color into it, which is why we've tried to do that a little bit here with the other ride colors. But the water is a really, really nice contrast to the sand and lets us do a little bit of work there, especially because we're not really doing any kind of heavy foliage, which that greenery kind of does the same sort of thing, which is why we went so heavily into the oasis on the log flume the last go-around. And we'll do something similar with this, but as with some of the rapids rides that we've done here previously, we're going to play around with elevation a little bit and a bit of rock work and some other things just to give it a little bit of interest. So I was starting to do a little bit of a hill and drop on the back side of the coaster, but then we got into some clearance issues, so instead what we're going to do is kind of put it here in the middle. Then we can build this up a little bit. That would let us build a small tunnel here. And we're kind of building in both directions more or less to our station, and the station being sort of the last thing that we're going to build right here. And you'll notice I sink down the rapids into the landscape, and I tend to just prefer that. While you do see some rapids rides that have the trough up outside of the ground, for the most part they're usually integrated pretty well into the ground itself, and they ebb and flow, kind of get wider, get skinnier, whatever throughout. So we don't really have that luxury with this ride type, but at the very least we can sink it down into the landscape a little bit and help the look a little bit. Unfortunately, since we're not using like zero clearancing, we can't bring up the water over top of it to help that look even further, but we'll do what we can here by raising up some water around the thing so we can at least make it look kind of sort of like it's part of a larger body of water. I think that helps kind of the overall look for the thing. Of course, now what we need to do is make sure that water looks like it can't just overflow its bounds and kind of go every which way. So we're going to play a lot with the landscaping here just to raise it up a little bit here and there. Typically, if I'm going to do a body of water, I like to keep it down one tile from the stuff around it, but in this case, we don't really have that luxury, so we're just going to deal with it in this regard. So here we are trying to get our pathway squared away. The nice thing is, because the trough takes up half of the two heights that are required for clearance, we only have to go up the one to actually get over the thing visually. So that's easy enough. I did bring the queue over there so that it lines up with those pre-existing themed areas there, so I think it looks relatively clean to do that. And now we're going to kind of clean up the little bit of the edges on our bodies of water here, and then also raise this up a bit. I'm going to throw in one of these Sphinx elements, which they're already out and around on the map, but no reason we can't have another one. And it gives a kind of a good icon element for the ride itself, with the ride coming up and kind of circling around the front of it. Be sort of a neat, imposing structure there before you go down the final drop there into the splash zone. Of course, with the water, it does make sense that we would have a little bit more of a fertile area around it. So we're going to go through and throw in some bushes and a couple of palm trees and some other things. So similar Oasis type design to what we had for the Flume. And here you can see I'm kind of raising that up a little bit, so it looks like that water is not going to be easily overflowing. Obviously, we're not doing every last area like that, but I want to at least make it look kind of sort of like the water sits a little lower than the landscape around it. Now we got to soften the edge of this mountain here just a little bit and make it look not totally natural, but at least kind of semi-natural. And we use some of this rock texture around the top section, and then also more of this grass, so we can kind of blend in this whole thing a little bit. Since there's already mountains on the map, it isn't out of place to see something like this over here, although ours is a little more irregular than some of the other ones that are in the rest of the map, but that's okay. I think it's generally hidden by dumping a bunch of stuff on top of it. Now we want to build a second car ride. We did the kind of adventure trucks ride last go around. This time we're going to use the sports cars and just kind of circle it around the coaster here a little bit just to fill in this space. We've got a pretty big flat area back here, and to be honest, if we had built things more efficiently, I don't think we would need to buy any extra land, and we could really fit this whole park fairly easily into the given space in the beginning. But we were a little spread out, especially with the coaster for one, and the way that we kind of wasted some of that land there behind the brake run for the coaster, for example. But that's okay. We are going to lower a section of this car ride down into some trenches, basically give it a little bit of interest. This one's probably a lot less exciting, I suppose, than the other one that we built that was a lot more integrated into theming, but at the same time, this one does have some great interaction with the coaster, which I think is kind of nice. And we'll go back through here too with the Egyptian fences and drop some of these block walls inside this trench, so we can kind of make it look like maybe an archaeological excavation site or something, and then also change the texture down there just to give it a little bit of a different look and use the use these walls to our advantage. We're also going to make sure that nobody can hop out of these cars and go try and catch this coaster train, so we'll go ahead and put some fencing around here just to fill it in just a bit and balance that out with the fencing from the Egypt set as well, which is a little more solid and kind of bulky. Throw in a few bits and pieces of greenery in there too, just to give it that little bit of color texture. And interestingly enough, as I look back at this park here, as I've been recording some of these things, it does still feel a fair bit plain to me. I feel like we probably could have come back and added in a good deal more in the way of landscaping, but nonetheless, I think it still turned out kind of okay. So there we can see a failed experiment for a junior coaster. Thought maybe we could circle around that big pyramid. Didn't really work out quite the way that I wanted it to, but it was at least a try. We're going to have a few failed experiments here. You may remember the first time in the first episode when we tried to build the monorail and it didn't quite work out. We're going to do that again here and try and get underneath of this section of the looping coaster as well as the flume over there, and trying a couple of different routes here to see what's actually going to fit. As it turns out, none of it does, and it's not quite the right way to squeeze this whole thing in here, but we're at least going to give it a try here for a minute. But we will come back to it, so I promise we will actually finish this episode by building a monorail. In the meantime, it seems like the thing to do to build a couple of more flat rides and things. Not that we've really had rain issues, so we don't necessarily need enclosed, but we might as well do a bumper cars, and we'll stick it back here, kind of in the corner, and sink it down a little bit, kind of paint it that dull brown just to blend it in a little bit, and then move the fence there so you can actually see the ride from the pathway. Add in some of those flowers too, just to give it a little bit of decoration there along the front. and we had a balloon stall too. So now I need to build a little bit of food area back here because we really haven't done that since the beginning of the map when we started the park. So I'm going to do this little raised area for seating over top of the water and then put some of those food stalls there in front of it. And I feel like that's a decent look, at least, just because it helps us fill out that space back there and gives us a little more food and beverage options. Not really that the guests have been complaining with it. It's actually fairly easy to placate everyone with food and beverage. You very rarely get notifications on it. So once you at least have a food, a drink, and a restroom, then you're pretty well set. So not necessarily a big issue, but either way, we can fill it out a little bit because there is money to be made in concessions for sure, even if it's not a lot of money. But we're doing just fine now with the inverted coaster being open. We're rolling in the money right now, so like I said earlier, it is not really a problem anymore. What is a problem is this mine train layout, which I am struggling mightily on. This was definitely a stream of coaster struggles, I would say, as you are seeing in the first episode and this one as well, where it's just trying to get the layout right and seeing what works. To my excuse, I suppose, I was feeling fairly under the weather when we streamed this, so I think I was streaming with a fairly decent fever here, so it's a little hard to concentrate when you're trying to cough up a lung, but nonetheless, we are trying to build a mine train here. You can see that effort was a no-go, and trying to fill in this space kind of right next to the pyramid. Luckily, we've got the space next to the edge of the boundary that we can buy some more land just to get a little bit more to work with. And here's where we introduce the idea of the double lift mine train. There's really two kind of styles of mine train generally. There's a lot of different mine trains, obviously more than that, but you generally have your Arrow mine train and your Vekoma mine train. Most of the Vekomas tended to have a side-by-side lift like this. Sometimes they would have a third lift that was separate as well. But Calamity Mine, that you might remember from the Wallaby Holland or Belgium scenario in the original RCT2, that one is one of the examples of the Vekoma one. And typically those are centered double lifts that have kind of coaster stuff on either side of them. Right now we're trying sort of an off-center approach here, and I have the kind of secondary thing with the second lift there, nice helix down into a finale right into the brakes. Fairly short, really. And the nice thing is with a double lift mine train like this, you don't have to have each section terribly long. Like, it really isn't a thing that has to happen. You can still get a decently long ride length with the two lift hills. But we are going to eventually abandon this one too, as I try and figure out what the plan is here. But we're not going to abandon the concept as a whole, and we'll go more for the traditional Vekoma look here in just a second. This triangle is sort of a bit of a challenge to fit into, not just to get up and over or underneath of that diagonal brake run track, but also just to fill in a helix-filled mine train, or not even helix-filled, but just turn-filled with quick direction changes and stuff, and still make it kind of work into the space provided. So it's often, I find, fairly challenging to do mine trains because you have to achieve that kind of level of jankiness where it has some sort of weird transitions, has some sort of odd elements, little drops, little turns, little things that just wouldn't really work for what you might consider a kind of smooth coaster design. But that's the challenge, is when it comes to building some of these. So here we are, though, as we try again, and third time will be a charm, so thankfully we can finish it this go-around with our double lift here in the center, our station, and then our secondary brake on the side. The cool thing, too, about these double lift coasters is if you get the block brakes correct, you can have two trains on either lift at the same time, so you can have a little bit of interaction going on there, which is kind of fun for it. But the general idea here is to, on the right-hand lift, we're going to sort of slalom back and forth on that side, cross underneath the lift hill, and then go over to that brake run. Then on the second one, we'll start by turning away from the rest of the ride, cross back over, and then work our way over to the brakes. So that's what we will do, just like this. So we got to work a little bit on clearances just to make sure that we have everything correct, which is why I'm building the second half first, which is sort of a lower section here. and we're going to kind of wrap our way back there. Now I'll build my brake run so I know basically where I'm having to connect to, and then we can fill in the first half of the ride just to make sure that it all fits just right. So after that second lift, we have the kind of stacked helix there, and then we're just going to kind of meander back and forth here and then tie it into the end. We ran out of room right there, unfortunately, with the ending, but we'll be able to fix that a little bit later. But right now here, we're just trying to connect here part 1 into part 2. So we have that sort of back and forth, and then the final dive right here. So we kind of slowly pick up speed as the ride works down, and we'll cross underneath, get our turn here, and then we will turn into the brakes. The challenge here is that we're going to end up with a fairly short brake run here into the lift hill, which isn't necessarily the worst thing, but I do like it to be, if possible, about the same length as one of the trains. But since we don't quite have the room, we're just going to finish it off. So we do 3 trains because we have the 2 lift hills, so that way we can have 2 coasters out on the course at one point and then 1 coaster loading. First, we're going to step over here for just a minute and complete this little area here with a little bit of fencing. I did want to, at one point, kind of build out that side a little bit more, and that pathway underneath of the inverted coaster would be sort of the gateway to all that, but we finished the scenario quicker than I really thought we needed to, and or thought that we were going to anyway, and that thought was more or less abandoned. So now we are just trying to get this positioning right. Like I said earlier, that will allow us to fix up our turnaround here at the far end, make that a little bit smoother. And then I thought, why not throw in a little bit of theming here? It's not quite on top of the whole ride, but it does give a little bit of a backdrop. We're going to put this whole thing in a tunnel, and then we can play around with the land here a little bit and give it a bit of theming. Mine trains are sort of geared towards theming in general. Granted, we are not going to theme this up like maybe we could or should, but at the very least we can level this thing off up here, and we're going to throw in one of these giant pyramids and plonk it right on top there. The problem now is that it is raised up compared to the rest of the landscape, so we need to figure out how to blend that in just a little bit. So that's what we're going to do here by raising up some of this landscape so that those vertical faces are not right up against the mine train, so it just looks a little bit nicer in general. You can get a little jagged and choppy off to the side of it, but you don't want it just right up against the pyramid itself. A little bit of those streaks of dirt and grass. This is kind of the general way of landscaping this kind of thing, or just desert in general. You do patches of dirt, patches of rock, and then patches of those sort of grassy sections there where we can work with. And I'll line this queue with a little bit of fencing as well, and then we're going to more or less call it a day with a little bit of rock work here along the front of the station, just to theme that up very slightly. But this becomes our last coaster here, and we are set for this one to be done. So that ends up being 4 coasters here. Not a bad selection there with the mine train, the suspended, the looping coaster, and the inverted. But now we will put in an observation tower. Thought maybe right over here by the inverted coaster. It at least has a good look there right along the edge. Gives us a little bit of more interaction, I guess, with the coaster too. Kind of makes it look like that thing was there first and the coaster wraps around it. Obviously not the case, but at least the general look is there. But now we've got a nice observation tower. We've got something else tall in the park alongside our other drop tower there that was kind of buried. And do a little bit more fencing work along there too, and that wraps that up. Coming back to the very front of the park, this was something that we worked on last episode fairly early on too. We've got our swinging ship over there that had that sort of little body of water, and we raised up the land there in preparation for it. At one point I was thinking about trying to throw like a go-kart or something into this little rectangular space, but in the end it seemed like theming was the way to go, so that's what we did. Expanded that body of water a little bit, added some landscaping there too, just to help that overall look, and then finish it off. Then we'll also throw in a swinging inverted ship right here. We are already over the guest goals, so that's a good thing, and we still have a couple of months to go, so not too bad here on the whole. Can add a little bit more theming in that queue, kind of similar to matching what we did in the car ride as well. It becomes a little bit repetitive, especially on this sort of a theme with the desert. There's not a whole lot of variety you can do and compared to, I guess, having grass or dirt or trees and things like that where you can vary what's going on. But I think we've achieved at least a little bit of interest going on here, so there's something to work from there. And now the monorail returns. So this is our next go around here with the monorail, and this one is actually going to end up working out this time. So spoiler, we're actually going to finish it. So what I wanted to do is kind of wrap this thing around, and it would make sense to do the monorails earlier or do them in kind of sections and then come back through and connect them up later, because you don't want to spend on transport rides early on in your scenario build like trains or monorails, because they're a really big spend. However, you also don't want to build yourself in a corner, which is kind of what I did here and why we had 2 or 3 failed attempts to build ourselves a monorail before that. So it's sort of that give and take a little bit. I would say the best suggestion is probably to build it in sections and pieces and just expand it when you have the money in different areas. But we didn't do that here, and to be honest, part of the fun for me is trying to figure out how to thread monorails through, or trains through an existing park that's already kind of established, and do it also without changing the elevation of the ride. As we've said many a time, I'd prefer not to change the overall height of these kind of rides. So we're going to do that by running through some tunnels here, cutting up underneath our Ferris wheel, which is maybe a little bit sketchy from a foundation standpoint, but we're going to get away with it. Now we are over towards the back of the park here and try and figure out how to thread through this. Ideally, I want to be on the other side of the inverted coaster, so we can see that right now the clearances don't quite work through there unless we go right through the middle of the 0G roll there, which is kind of fun because that means we can have a really interesting near miss on the coaster too, where you're coming at this monorail track and then you just kind of flip over it at the very last minute. But we need a station. That's very important because otherwise you can't ride it without. And the nice thing is this landscape kind of comes up to meet the level of the monorail. So if we build it into this mountainside right here, that's going to allow us to very cleanly put a monorail station in there and then kind of raise up the whole thing to meet it. And that's what we do. So now comes our connection up to that space. And then we'll raise our pathway up to try and find a smooth route to get the thing up there. And we're also going to go ahead and connect it over the hill while we're at it, so we kind of complete that loop of pathway, as we always like to do as best as possible, as loops are good. So there we go, connected across to that thing. And we can go ahead and change the color of our track and then also the color of these different monorail cars, which I like to do them different colors for each one of the trains. It just kind of looks nice, I think. But that's it. That is our win right there. So why don't we jump over to the real-time portion and let's take a look at this park. So here is our completed Pacific Pyramids Park. We not really smashed the goal, but we got over 1,000 guests by end of year 4. Not like that was a terribly hard goal, but that's all right. I think the park turned out okay, all things considered. We definitely struggled on the coaster layouts and just kind of getting the whole thing set up, and I think it does feel maybe a little bit plain, but doing it again, I feel like maybe there's a little bit more opportunity for landscape perhaps, but nonetheless I think it still turned out okay. I like the choice of this green path that we used. We didn't end up filling in the rest of the midway here, but we have our carousel, our slide, and our scrambler and everything kind of all set in the area. I was pretty happy with how the swinging ship turned out with this little water body here. I think that worked fairly well. And then also our log flume. I'm kind of going out of order from how we built things, but the log flume worked fairly well here, kind of nestled into this corner with the drop right down the landscape there, monorail going over top of it now, which I think looks kind of nice, and then our coaster coming through there too. A little bit of interaction here, a little bit of a tunnel as well. Actually, a fairly large tunnel, I suppose, more than I guess I'd typically go for, but not too bad. Well, let's pick up our coaster here, dropping down that first steep drop, and then up and around to the flat section here, and then into our loop. Stats are high, high, medium for this one, and it has decent pacing throughout the rest of the ride. Not a terribly long ride. We got this nice drop here into the tunnel through the mountain, and then out and around and into the brakes here, so works out fairly well. On the other side of the park, we have our kind of trifecta of rides here in the middle. We have our adventure car ride sort of thing here that crosses over top of the pathway, goes up around the coaster, goes through this tunnel. It just has a lot of cool elements to it, I think. And then our drop tower here in the middle, sunk down into this little kind of excavated hole with the pathway around it. And then circling the whole thing is our Carry Pro suspended coaster here. So this is a medium, medium, low, which is fine. I don't really intend to go too heavily intense with it, I suppose. More realistic to what you typically have with little small drops and turns and things. Ends fairly nicely with a little bit of swinging and all of that. So pretty happy with how that one turned out. On the other side here up front, we have our mine train. This was the last one that we built. Medium, medium, low as well. Not too exciting because we actually didn't do a whole heck of a lot with the ride. It really doesn't pick up too much, but you can see what the block brakes do right there, where we get our side-by-side little bit of, not really racing necessarily, but some interaction there, which I think is kind of nice. Also our little body of water there for the suspended coaster to start by going out over top of. Here you can see both sections around there. Fairly short sections. We could very easily build up this if we wanted to a little bit larger, but I think it worked out just fine right here. Going back to the back of the park, there's our top spin that is using that existing bit of theming there. Still kind of hard to imagine any kind of antiquities department saying, yeah, totally, go ahead, put a top spin on top of our ancient relic, but you know what, we're going to take it, why not? Swing inverter ship there, our observation tower, our car ride. Got our nice little Sphinx Rapids boats here that go up underneath the coaster, give that a little bit of interaction there, and we can pick up the coaster here as it comes along. So this is a high, very high, high, which is not surprising for an inverted coaster, for one. Also a couple of tight corners there just to get the spacing right, since this is a kind of sort of Batman clone, but not really. We don't go the right direction with this wing over, as we talked about before, but I think it works fairly well, and it's a fairly popular ride too. You can see with the queue, it's doing well even at $10 entry fee, so we are making money hand over fist, which is great. So that definitely helps help push us over there at the end. And then of course our monorail that runs through the whole thing, so at least that's a nice little scenic view at the end, and just sort of victory there after having done 3 separate tries to build that thing, actually being able to build it in the end. But there we are, we filled up fairly well. We still had a lot of land that we could buy. There's all of this on this side, and there's basically all of the rest of this mountain and everything around it too. So this park could be effectively doubled nearly, but we didn't need it, and we won't need to expand that out, but this one is all done. So that's Pacific Pyramids now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, but definitely hang around for the before and after. And if you want to catch any of the streams where we do these live, you can go to twitch.tv/Amusement Academy. Also look down below for links to our Discord and all of our other stuff that we've got if you want to hang out a little further and be part of the conversation. Hope to see you around, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye now.